I can tell you what your values are by asking you two questions. Tell me how you spend your money. Tell me how you spend your time.
That's Susan Fowler, renowned leadership consultant and the best-selling author of Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does.
Let's say that you tell me, oh, my family is really my priority. And I say, how much time a week do you spend working and how much time a week do you spend with your kids? And if you're spending 90 hours a week working and you resent having to take your kids to school or pick them up from school, then saying that you value family is just bull.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of CRISP, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. CRISP started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. Today, we're revisiting one of our most popular episodes from the podcast where I sat down with Susan Fowler to discuss why attempting to motivate people is a losing proposition, the psychological needs that all high-performing team members have, and how to create a working environment that enables you and your team to thrive.
There's so much external motivation and pressure, billable hours, prestige clients, win, win, win. It's an unhealthy environment. If you look at the most successful people you know, not only just financial success or status, but also you sense that they're just a good person. They have a sense of peace. They have a family life that's rewarding in multiple ways. They're not the people who have won at all costs.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. All right, Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm here to be optimally motivated and share ideas and learn at the same time. So I'm thrilled.
Yes, and I love that because the people listening are going to find out exactly what that means. And I know you've written several books, and today we're going to talk about the most recent book, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does. But what I love about this, and I love books like these, is that you take a topic that there's been just so much certainty around, in the premise of motivation, and then you just mess everybody up and say, well, here's what the research says. So I love that approach. What was your goal in writing the book?
I've been studying motivation for 40 years because I became a vegetarian a long time ago. And I was the kind of gal, Michael, I love meat. I actually had pork fat sitting on my stove because everything like bacon grease, everything tasted better with with a little bit of meat grease in it. And I saw a documentary about the way we treat the animals we eat, and overnight became a vegetarian. And I'm a strict vegetarian, and it was the easiest thing I've ever done. It wasn't easy in terms of finding the food to eat because back then, people didn't really cater to vegetarians as much as we do now. But it was easy for me. And people would say, oh my gosh, you've got so much willpower. You're so determined. And I said, wow, it hasn't taken any willpower whatsoever. And so I was so intrigued with how was I able to change overnight a lifetime of a certain habit and make it easy. And that yet other things I was struggling with. So I really, really studied the whole concept of motivation, and the work with self-determination theory just answered my questions. And then I became just so intent on not only practicing it for myself, and I noticed that as kind of a theme in a lot of the podcasts that you do, that a lot of people have written books for themselves. It was like something that they needed to answer in their own lives, and then just really dedicated to sharing the information with others because it really does change the quality of your life.
Agreed. And obviously we're going to talk a lot about motivation, but just to start, how do you define motivation?
Well, I think it's a really good question. When I started writing, I looked it up and there was over 200 official definitions of motivation. So I'm just being very simple, and it's the energy to act. So motivation is your energy to act. And the fact is you always have energy to act, but you don't always have the same level or quality of energy to act. And so the problem with most definitions of motivation is that they are based on the traditional and now disproven concept of what motivation is and what it isn't.
Yeah. I know you state that attempting to motivate people is a losing proposition, no matter your resources. Why?
Because we've always thought as motivation is something you either have or you don't have, that it's a quantity. So, how motivated are you? So it's like, how much motivation do you have? And that always led to, okay, if you have low motivation, then what are we going to do to make up so that you can get high motivation? And that led us down the road of incentives and carrots and, trying to bribe people or force people or threaten people to be more motivated. And what the research shows is that motivation is really about the quality of motivation that a person has, not the quantity. And so people are always motivated, but just not always in the way you'd want them to be motivated. Or maybe they're motivated to do something different. We have to look at the quality of a person's motivation. And once we start looking at the quality of a person's motivation, the options for what we can do to create a culture, an environment, and for ourselves, the way that we can look at our goals and our habits and our dreams, wow, a whole new universe opens up.
You share an interesting perspective in that, people are always motivated. And I'd love to hear about the distinction between suboptimal and optimal motivation, just when it comes to all this. Like, how do you differentiate the two?
Think about this, that most of us think of motivation as intrinsic or extrinsic. And it's this binary choice, right? Of you're either motivated or you're not, or if you are motivated, you're either intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. And I think what is either fortunate or unfortunate is that motivation science is much more complex. So my goal has been for the last 20 years has been to take this really complex, amazingly rich and empirically based science and make it accessible, make it practical and usable. And so what we know through motivation science is that there's actually 6 different ways of being motivated. And so we group them into suboptimal and optimal rather than intrinsic and extrinsic. And the suboptimal motivation is like the junk food of motivation. So let's say that you're really low energy, like you're just, kind of dragging in the middle of your day. So what do? You eat a candy bar, or maybe you drink some coffee, or you have a Coke. And so what happens? Your blood sugar just takes a hike, right? And you have this burst of energy. But what happens? Shortly thereafter, your blood sugar drops precipitously. In fact, it drops to lower than where you were before you did the sugar or the carb or the caffeine hit. And now what do you need? You need another hit of sugar or caffeine or carbs or whatever. And so you're on this roller coaster ride all day long. Well, that's your physical energy. Well, the same thing is true of your psychological energy. Motivation is psychological energy. And so if you have what we call junk food motivation or suboptimal motivation, you might have this burst of energy to do something for a moment, but you're not going to sustain it over time. And have you ever had like that sugar rush, that high, and you realize you're moving fast, but you're kind of clumsy, or you're really not at your best? It's not healthy. So you're not firing on all cylinders. You're not taking advantage of what you could bring to whatever it is you're doing. So optimal motivation is like the health food of motivation. And, and the thing is that our society, I don't know if anyone's ever been through like a drive-through and you're getting your fast food, and before you get home, you're going to eat it at home with your family, right? But those French fries, they just smell so good. They're almost intoxicating. And I would almost guarantee that every single one of us has at least had one of those French fries while they're still hot and smelling so good, or maybe even eaten the whole package before we get home. And that's the lure of suboptimal motivation. Optimal motivation is more like health food. And unless you're like a vegetarian like me, it's rare to like take a piece of broccoli and go, oh, wow, this is just so fabulous. So the health food of motivation may not be as alluring, but it is so much more powerful and sustainable. And in the end run, it's what brings you peace and joy. And I'm not even going to use the word happiness, something more profound than happiness.
Yes. And I love one of the examples that you talk about in the book. And this is perhaps something that other organizations that have, leaders that are listening to this podcast have tried in their organizations. I think it was the incentive program where the employees of the organization, if they lost enough weight, they could win an iPad. And then there were people who actually lost a lot of weight and won the iPad. But then I think you found that after following them 12 weeks after winning the prize, that the majority resumed their old behaviors, they regained the lost weight, and many even added more weight.
Absolutely. And so if we can get people to do anything we want them to do, I would encourage people, because it's just fun. I don't want them to do it right now, but after they're done watching us or listening to us, go on YouTube and look up B.F. Skinner's studies on pigeons. And it really is fascinating because you will see these really grainy videos from like the late 30s and early 40s, or I guess it went there, or videos, but recordings. And he says, I can get this pigeon to turn in a 360-degree circle within minutes. And of course, it's a conditioned pigeon. And when it hears this noise, a pellet drops, and it knows that whatever it was doing at that time, it's going to get rewarded. So the pigeon is just pecking around, doing its thing. And when he goes in the direction that Skinner wants it to, they give him a pellet. And pigeons are actually pretty smart, and they go, oh, wow, okay, every time I go to the right, I get a pellet. I'm going to keep going to the right. And then all of a sudden they stop it, and he doesn't get the pellet when he goes to the right. So he's pecking around again, and now he goes to the right, but he goes further to the right. Oh, now he gets a pellet. So within a minute, he realizes if he keeps going to the right, he's going to keep getting the pellet. And those studies were so compelling back then that people thought, wow, we can get pigeons to do whatever we want them to do by rewarding them. Maybe it'll work with people. And it did. And it does. It's only been recently that we've started to think, wow, people are not pigeons, and that we can actually be motivated by things much more profound than a pellet. And especially when organizations start running out of pellets, or it's kind of like when you say, oh, meet this deadline and we'll give you pizza. And everyone goes, all right, cool. Every Friday we get pizza. And then pretty soon it's like, who cares about pizza? Okay, now we're going to add beer. Okay, pizza and beer. And so you have to keep adding to the rewards because people are doing it now for the reward, not for any other more inherent reasons. So we've gotten really lazy. And we just think if we can throw incentives and stuff at people or scare them, that they'll do our bidding. And they will for a time. But but even then, I would say it's not people bringing them their best selves. You're not getting the most creative work. There's so much research around when people are suboptimally motivated, they may achieve the goal, but there's less creativity. The quality of the achievement is not as good as if they were optimally motivated, and they're less likely to turn around and do it again or sustain that behavior.
Yeah, agreed. And given that we are more, complex beings, and you discussed the three psychological needs of, autonomy, relatedness, competence. Could you speak to those and also perhaps what leaders can do to support those needs in their team members?
Yeah, and let me explain those three terms. Optimal motivation depends on three psychological needs, and these are called nutriments. So if you think about your physical energy, we need nutrients in order to create physical energy. And as I said, motivation is psychological energy. So we need the complement of that, which is what they call nutriments. And what the research shows is that there's three psychological needs that are absolutely mandatory to thrive and be optimally motivated. The research says that they're autonomy, relatedness, and competence. My first book, my first version of why motivating people doesn't work and what does, was translated into 14 languages, and I used those scientific terms, autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And then I did a second book called Master Your Motivation, and then we were doing the revision of the first book. And my publisher said, we can't keep using those terms because they're too hard to translate and they're not accessible enough. So I went to the fathers of self-determination theory, Dr. Edward Deci and Dr. Richard Ryan, and I said, I'd like to change autonomy, relatedness, and competence to choice, connection, and competence. And they gave it their blessing. So I'm going to use those three terms if it's okay. And so what we find is that if people don't feel like they have autonomy or choice, they don't feel like they're in control of what they're doing, that they will not be optimally motivated. And if any one of these three psychological needs is missing, then we're not going to experience optimal motivation because it's like a domino effect. One affects the other. They're very integrated. The second one is connection. And connection means that you have a sense of purpose. This is really important, that you're contributing to the greater good, not to a tribe where I'm in and you're out, but to the greater good, the welfare of the whole, which is a real mistake that most of us are making in our lives right now with all of our tribalism and thinking that I belong to a gang, a group, a political party, or whatever it is. And we don't have a connection to the greater good, the welfare of the whole. And so connection is a really big umbrella. It's so critical, and it has to do with being connected to your values. Do you even know what your values are in that sense of purpose? And then competence is not necessarily being a master of something. It is feeling that you're growing and learning. So it's like if you're on the ski slope and your goal is to do double black diamond, slopes, but you're on the bunny hill, not parallel skiing, you're doing the thing with your skis are all crossed, and you're like, oh my gosh, you could say, oh, I'm not optimally motivated because I'm not on that double black diamond. Or you could say, and this is what happens is, wow, I actually made it down the hill today without falling. Or at the very end, I turned my skis and I was in a parallel motion. And so competence means that you might be on your way to mastery. For anybody who's got children or is around children, let me just give you three really quick examples that you'll see every day of these psychological needs at work. So think about when you're feeding a baby and you go to put that spoon in the baby's mouth. How often does that baby either try to reach for the spoon, and he doesn't have the competence to even find his mouth, and that's why you have carrots and peas all over his face. Or if he's not ready for that next bite, he will shut his mouth and you can't pry it open, right? So that's his need at a very young age for choice and autonomy. Think about speaking to a toddler, or let's put it this way. Let's say the toddler wants to speak to you, and maybe the toddler is like, kind of hanging on your shirt or trying to get your attention, and you're finally like listening to the toddler. Have you ever had a toddler literally take your face and turn it so that they're looking at you? Because they want that connection. They know that there needs to be that human connection. And we are social animals. We need that sense of connection. So just notice it. There's studies shown that 2-year-olds, that if a mother, they'll do a study where the mother drops something or needs help, and that little 2-year-old will do everything it can to try to help. If that's just in their nature. And then think about competence. Think about a little baby learning to walk. And they don't just get up and walk. They crawl. And then you notice when they first stand and they're trying to learn to walk, they run and then they fall. Now, do they cry? Oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. I can't walk. I'm such a dummy. No, they're laughing. They're joyful. And they get up and they try it again. They love learning. They love the process of learning. And then what do? We put them in schools where we say, okay, we're going to grade you, we're going to judge you, we're going to incentivize you to learn. And what we've done with most kids by the time they're out of high school is we have incentivized learning to the point where they forgot that it was something they loved to do, that it was natural. Sorry, that was a long explanation for what choice, connection, and competence.
I've got 2 young children, so you are preaching to the choir. I mean, I've even found the importance of choice. For example, like every night, when I'm doing bedtime, I'll ask our daughter, I'm like, So what book would you like to read tonight, right? As opposed to me picking the book and just giving them an opportunity to choose, here's what we're going to do. So
Absolutely. My daughter has selected clothes for her kids where everything goes together, or kind of does, and they just get to choose whatever they want to wear every single day, because she's just fixed it so that she doesn't even have to weigh in on what you're wearing. And it really does give them a sense of autonomy every morning when they wake up, just the little things. So think about if you're running a law firm and you've got to have rules and regulations, and you're working in a very defined legal space. It's really important to give people a chance where autonomy can exist, to give them those choices. I was working with a pharmaceutical company, and they had a group of really good salespeople that they've discovered had broken a policy. One of their policies was, when you're presenting research to a doctor, you can't just pick and choose. You have to give them the whole research study and then point out certain things. But these guys had kind of put their own little marketing materials together and just pulled out the salient points. And they were summarily fired. And everybody was like up in arms about this. I mean, it was just really it was a very chaotic time for people, because here they were, the best salespeople, but they had broached this. So I was talking to the managers and I said, how did you share that policy with them? And of course, what they said was, we have regulations, and if you break this regulation, you're going to get fired. So here's what you can't do, and here's what you have to do. And I said, what if we had thought about a different way of presenting that? What if we had said something like, according to the Food and Drug Administration, we have regulations here, and everybody will suffer if we break them. Let's talk about what freedom you have within these boundaries, and then have them brainstorm what they can and can't do. So it's having a conversation, like, where's the freedom? What freedom do you have? People don't mind boundaries. Everybody needs boundaries. They appreciate boundaries. But then we stop and we don't say, okay, but let's talk about the freedom we have within those boundaries. And that's what's important.
I love it. And what about, if you get into, let's say, connection, in terms of like a working environment, what are some ways to foster that?
I think that this is one of the areas we've let people down the most, and where we have the greatest room for growth. So this is a place where I'm going to learn. I'm going to say something I've never said before. I'm going to say something that may not make sense. Let me just try it. The reason that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is such a big deal is because we haven't, in our workplaces, made it comfortable or safe for a lot of people. And we're now just coming to realize that there are a lot of people that we weren't able to help live their best life at work because they were living in fear, or they were being held back in some way. And so we may have gone, too far to say, okay, now let's regulate DE&I. And so ironically, now we're not giving people choices about how to have inclusion. And that's the backlash. And so anytime we make things black or white, yes or no, it's automatically going to affect people's sense of autonomy. But that autonomy then says, wow, if I don't have a choice, it makes me feel left out. It makes me feel less than. And so that whole sense of connection and autonomy and choice, they're so interwoven. Did that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So connection at work, it's not just, though, what we were just talking about, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's also values. And here's where I think a lot of, especially people who own their own law firms or are leading a law firm, they probably have their own set of values, I would like to think. But what they assume is that other people should have those same values. And the fact is that most people go to work without really even understanding what their values at work are. And so connection means connection to values. So I see organizations that, everybody knows like what the values are for the organization because they have them on cards. Or I worked at in Peoria, for a major tire manufacturer, and you walk into this amazing 2-story lobby, and they have these 5 pillars, and they were huge, and on each pillar was a value. So, I mean, everybody knew what the values of that organization are. Then we stop. We don't say to leaders, well, so what are your values? And we don't then ask individuals, what are your values? And so people are working in an organization that has values, but without a clear understanding what their own are. And so if I have a direct report or somebody who reports to me and we're doing goal setting and I'm asking them, what's your motivation to achieve this goal? That motivation needs to be tied to a value I have. But if I don't know what those values are and you don't know what my values are, then goal setting just becomes this thing I've got to do, and I really am not very optimally motivated to achieve it. So connection really has to do with, if people are saying, what's something I can do right now? I would say, have a values conversation with the people you lead.
Yeah.
Say, yeah, these are the values of the organization, but here's what I value. And maybe what you value is really hard work, working 90 hours a week. And that's how you've made it to the top. And then you look at other people and they've got families and they've got, they're going on vacations, and you're going, you're not going to make it to the top like that. And so there's a mismatch of values there that needs to be discussed because it's there. The tension is there, but the conversation hasn't happened. I can tell you what your values are by asking you 2 questions. Tell me how you spend your money. Tell me how you spend your time. So let's say that you tell me, oh, my family is really my priority. And they say, how much time a week do you spend working and how much time a week do you spend with your kids? And if you're spending 90 hours a week working and you resent having to take your kids to school or pick them up from school, or I don't have time for dinner, or I'm going to miss that soccer game, or I can't go to your recital, then saying that you value family is just bull. That's not what you value. If you tell me that you're compassionate and that you're generous and that you care about others who are less fortunate than you, and I look at how you spend your money, and I don't see a percentage of that money going to people in need or helping others who are less fortunate than you, or if you're not volunteering, maybe it's you don't have the money, but you have the time. So if I ask you, how are you spending your time? How are you spending your money? That's what's going to reflect what your values are. And so I would encourage leaders to really get their own values in line. There's a difference between programmed values and developed values, and really then have those conversations with the people they lead, because otherwise connection is really a challenge.
And let's say in the event a leader is having a conversation with one of their team members about their values, and they determine that there's a misalignment on values, like we are mismatched, right? Like in your example, let's say the leader values hard work, the team member may not value, the same things, and let's say they value family more and spending time with their family more. What do you do in that type of situation? First
of all, I think the leader really needs to ask themselves if their values are the best values, are the values that are, do you really want other people to have those values? I call it the Randy Connolly effect, and Randy Connolly is a dear friend of mine, and I remember when he first started to work at an organization that I was working with, that was him. He's going to put in the hours, and he was going to be really good in the hours that he was working, but he was really clear that he wasn't going to work overtime, and he wasn't ambitious because he had a young family and he had a lifestyle that was very important to him. He was so valuable in the hours that he worked. And so people said, okay, we'll just let Randy do Randy's thing. As his kids grew older and his family evolved, he started then contributing more in different ways. And today, he's one of the most beloved leaders in the organization and has actually won the most values-led person award at this company and been named the leader of the company numerous times. So I guess what I would ask for people to is look at the values of, here's somebody who's really dedicated to doing a good job. It's not the hours that he's putting in. And so a lot of, I think, high achievers think that hard work and a number of hours, I'm speaking from experience here because that's always been me, the princess warrior. I'm always going to do more than anybody asks, or and I always expected that other people should do the same. And now I'm looking at that and saying, wow, how short-sighted of me. and how sad that I wouldn't be able to take advantage of people for the gifts they bring and the values they have. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, Michael. The what do you do is you really think about it, you talk about it. And my experience over these last 40 years of really studying this is that when values are clear, if there's a values mismatch, people opt out. And, they leave because they realize, this is not the place for me.
And it seems like values can change too, right? You're allowed to change your mind, and you're allowed to
I hope
evolve.
so. I think it's one of my favorite words is evolve. And we don't, in our society, we don't have a lot of tolerance for people who actually do evolve. If you read novels or if you watch movies, we ache for people to have that arc where they go from being a reprobate or being mean and angry or whatever to somebody who has enlightenment and awareness. And yet in our real lives, it's like, boy, you make a mistake and we're going to cancel you. People need to evolve and should evolve, and we need to give them room and space to do that.
Yeah, agreed. Well, what about the last, the third C, competence? Right? I don't know if you've ever heard the expression sometimes, say that, you may not like what you're doing because you're not good at what you're doing. And if you were good at what you were doing, you might like it, right? Does that have anything to do with competence?
Yes. And I love that. Yes. That is that integration. So if you're, go back to my skiing example, sorry if you're not a skier, if your goal is to get to the double black diamond slopes, which are the really, all the moguls and the steep slopes, and you're still on that bunny slope 10 years from now, you are not going to be optimally motivated to ski, right? You need to see progress. And so there's been a lot of research around the whole concept of making progress and seeing progress, which is why goals are so important and milestones are so important, because then people can see that they're actually growing and learning and get a sense of, okay, I haven't mastered it, but I'm optimally motivated because I'm moving, I'm making progress. And so effective goal setting, monitoring progress is really critical. Giving people a chance to get better, to make training and development a focus in the organization. We talk about learning organizations, like everybody wants to have a learning organization. And yet, how do you feel if you're a leader and you walk into someone's office and they're reading a magazine or watching a video on YouTube? You probably go, oh, you're not working. What if they're actually learning? Do we actually give people the space to not feel guilty about learning while they're working? And so I would just ask leaders to think about what are the ways that we give people an opportunity to gain competence. And sometimes that means allowing them to fail. And, there's that really old story. I've probably been telling it for over 50 years, and it might be apocryphal, but I think it's actually real, where the head of IBM was so intent on achieving goals and it created an environment where, we really wanted people to succeed. And there was this one young man who failed abysmally and got called to his office and thought he was just going to be fired. And instead, the question was, tell me everything you know. How did you fail? Why did you fail? What would you do differently? So after the conversation, the leader says, thank you. That was really helpful information. And the young man says, you're not going to fire me? He says, are you kidding me? I just spent $1 million educating you. I'm not going to fire you. And I love that concept that we're learning from those mistakes. One of my very dear friends in life, and I taught at the University of San Diego for 25 years, and he was in the first cohort that I ever taught, is Gary Ridge, who's the CEO, well, he was the CEO of WD-40. He's now chairman emeritus. And Warren Buffett says that WD-40 is one of the top 4 brands in the world, moats that, that you just can't destroy this brand. It's just so beautifully orchestrated and ingrained. And so that's Gary Ridge. And Gary Ridge always had a philosophy of, we never use the word mistakes. We always call them learning moments. And so it's like you make a mistake and you come into a meeting and you go, wow, we had a big learning moment yesterday. And it just changes the whole culture, that it's a learning culture, that we're constantly learning, even from our failures. So I would encourage leaders to think about how do they handle mistakes? How do they handle failures? Looking for those learning moments to build competence always.
Right. And I want to shift gears a little bit because I know we've talked about, motivating people doesn't work, but what does? And it seems like individuals are motivated by different things, right? It's like, kind of like love languages. What resonates with one person may not resonate with another. But you state it's a bad idea, to assume you can tap into what somebody's motivations are by asking them what motivates you.
Yeah, because people don't know that they're motivated by choice, connection, and competence. And so when you go, what motivates you? They're looking at things, or let's say they're motivated by money. Think about like someone who is just miserable at their job. And so what they do is they go in, they say, instead of saying, I'm miserable at my job, I needed something, instead they go in, what do? They ask for more money. They don't pay me enough to put up with this, so they better pay me more. And they think that that's what's going to then alleviate the pain or the discomfort or the lack of optimal motivation at work. And so people don't know or understand their own motivation. And if they haven't had those values conversations, they might not understand that the work they're doing is actually a challenge to living or fulfilling their values. So yeah, asking what motivates you is just a wrong-headed question. Instead, what I would really encourage leaders to do is to ask people, let's think about the choices you've made. Let's think about the choices you have. Let's think about the choices that you've made or that you have and how those choices connect to your values or to something meaningful or significant or purposeful. Let's talk about how your choices actually help you grow and learn. What have you learned from the choices that you've made? And so if we could really help people highlight choice, connection, and competence, I think that we would getting to the root of what their motivation is rather than all these external, we tend to turn to things that are in our culture that we think will motivate us. Oh, well, you don't value, so somebody who lacks connection might say, oh, well, look, I'm still in a cubicle and so has a corner office. Or somebody who feels like there's an injustice at work might then start advocating for more money. Here's an interesting thing, Michael. I think there's a myth that the reason people leave organizations is because they have a bad manager. That's not the truth. The primary reason that people leave organizations is a sense of injustice. Now, if you have a bad manager and the organization is still endorsing that bad manager, that could be interpreted as a lack of justice. But if somebody isn't being paid fairly or being treated fairly, that's an injustice, and that is eroding connection. It also then starts to erode choice and a sense of competence. And so one of the things we really need to look at, and I think that was the good intention of all the DEI implementations, was to try to create social justice within the workplace. Asking people what motivates them is a dangerous question because it's not what motivates people, it's why they're motivated. And we need to get to people's why.
Yeah, I think you give an example of saying that maybe someone outwardly could say that they are motivated by money, but their values are really family and health, and money is what enables them to support their family and to, invest in their health.
Thank you so much, because Dr. Jacques Forest and actually my husband, Drea Zagarmi, have done amazing research on, does money motivate people? Yes, of course it does. But the question is why? So if you're motivated by money because you want it for a bunch of external reasons, you want to buy the flashy car, you want to be seen as successful, have the prestige, the status that comes from a lot of money, then that's suboptimal motivation. But to your point, if you are wanting the money because for family or for a cause that you are passionate about, that's very different. And then it's not really about the money, is it? It's really more about the family or whatever. So why the focus on money? We need to make money the byproduct. Just like in business, profit is not the goal. If profit is the goal, you're probably not going to get the profit. It's like being an athlete and watching this the scoreboard all the time instead of actually playing the game. And so profit is a byproduct of doing what you do well, of having a culture that creates excellence.
I love it. I think you've done a better job of connecting this than anyone I've ever spoken to. It's interesting in our, in the firms that we work with, especially when we're starting out, our goal is to help them achieve some sort of revenue goal, financial goal, like just money, right? Because that's what everybody says they want. But we want to do that as quickly as possible so that no longer becomes the primary driver. And that's where all the impact happens, right? Now, money's no longer the primary value here. It's really about how do I help others and how do I support as many people as possible. But it seems like you have to make it through that step first.
Well, that's why I know not everybody uses the SMART acronym for goal setting, but it was, it's pretty traditional, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound or trackable goals. And I changed the M to motivating because, yes, listen, you're absolutely going to set a financial goal. Absolutely. You're going to set a financial goal or revenue goal for your organization. The real question is why? And then that gets to your purpose, and that gets to what is you're really trying to accomplish? Again, I go to an organization like WD-40, and I know this from the inside out because my son-in-law actually worked at WD-40, and it was one of the best working experiences he's ever had in his life. And they really walk the talk. And the reason is, you're selling lubricant, right? And you're have revenue goals. But what they do is they just hone in on the more they sell, the more good they can do in the world, and they really understand their why, and they understand that they're building a culture that has a ripple effect in the world. I was at an airport. I happened to see Gary Ridge at an airport, and we were walking to a gate, and all of a sudden he goes, "Excuse me," and there was a workman working on one of the escalators, and he was down in the hole down there at the base of the escalator. And Gary Ridge walks over and he looks down at the guy and goes, "What kind of lubricant are you using?" The guy goes, What are you asking for? And it was just like this concept of we have the best product out there. And that best product is going to make whatever you're doing work better. And so it's my purpose in life to make sure you actually have the best tools available. And I just saw that, I just witnessed it in just that little moment. So the revenue goal is there, but it's the why the revenue goal is there is what's important. It's all the research around money it's the why you want the money, not the money itself that's important. I read and I was trying to think of where I read this or heard you say this because I was prepping, for this interview.
Uh-oh.
And somewhere you said something about more people in your organization being able to buy homes than they had previously. Do you remember saying that? Or
yes.
Am I putting you on the spot?
Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen more people pay down all the student loan debt, credit cards, buy homes. They're buying homes even now with the current interest rates, which I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but they're able to do it.
As a leader, it doesn't get better than that. Mark Cuban was talking about all the wealth that he had. He says, but by far what makes me the happiest is how many millionaires our company has created. He says, it's not me making money, it's all the people that work with me who are making money. And so their kids are getting better educations. We're able to give more to our communities. And he just went on and on and on. My opinion of Mark Cuban just changed overnight when I heard him talking about why he was so thrilled with the success of his businesses.
I love that. And that's actually,
it's the why.
That's a perfect segue because I read that you often ask leaders, what do you want from your people? And then you'll get answers like, I want them to work hard, hit their numbers, achieve their goals. I want their focus, etc. But then you'll ask them a follow-up question that's, well, what do you want for your people? And that gets a little bit of a slower answer. So why do you think that's the better question?
I have to tell you, that's one of my favorite things to do when I'm in front of a large group of leaders and just say, okay, and I actually do it as an exercise. Okay, what do you want from your people? And they all talk. And then I say, okay, what do you want for your people? And it's like, oh, wow. And then what's interesting is that they come up with the same things that you might want for your children. You want them to feel a sense of joy and not be afraid. You want them to have a home and to feel financially secure. And yet I've got some research here that's done by Dr. Ann Bradford. She's actually a JD. Right now, she's a PhD candidate using the framework of what I'm doing for her dissertation. And she sent me a lot of research. And let me just give you a few little insights that I hope that your law firm leaders might understand that this might be a possibility. 2016, Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation sponsored a study based on 13,000 practicing lawyers. The most striking finding was that 36%, depending on the type of measurement used, qualified as problem drinkers. And that these problem drinkers were more likely to have more symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress. A 2020 study of binge drinking by occupation found that the legal occupation was second highest in the United States. That aforementioned Hazelton study said significant numbers of surveyed lawyers reported mild or higher symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress. And then one more thing here, because I'd like to talk about this whole thing about the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and all of that. But it says here that a study was done by Reuters in 2022 that said that law firms were close to losing nearly 1/4 of their associates in 2021. And research has been done applying what I'm talking about to these law firms. And what they're finding is that there's a significant correlation to people who have optimal motivation electing to stay and people who have suboptimal motivation who are the ones most likely to want to leave or who are experiencing these symptoms of stress and depression. The whole legal community, there's actually an organization now, the Institute for Wellness in Law, that's really dedicated to this because health issues are huge. And I think a lot of it, and I actually spoke to their institute, that there's so much external motivation in, and pressure, billable hours, prestige clients, win. It's an unhealthy environment. So I think what you have to think about is if you look at the most successful people when I use success, I mean not only just financial success or status, but also you sense that they're just a good person. They have a sense of peace. They have a family life that's rewarding in multiple ways. They're not the people who have won at all costs. They're not people who say the means justify the ends. That the way we go about achieving our goals is just as important as the goal themselves.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartely. And I know you mentioned you want to talk about the Great Resignation. Sometimes leaders are lost. Now there's quiet quitting. Then it's something else. I think the ultimate question comes down to how do leaders create the environment where people want to stay?
Yeah, thank you. That's really important. And we've actually done our own research. We've done primary research where we've shown that when people have employee work passion, they have 5 intentions. And those 5 intentions are to stay in the organization. They want to endorse the organization. They'll use discretionary effort on behalf of the organization. They'll work at, above expected standards, and they will use citizenship behavior. So there's 5 intentions. And what we found was that there was a direct correlation between people who found themselves optimally motivated at work and those 5 intentions, and a significant correlation with people who are suboptimally motivated not having those 5 intentions. What we know is that when people are suboptimally motivated, they do not have an intent to stay in the organization. And so the Great Resignation that happened, called it all kinds of things, but let's call it the Great Resignation, happened during the COVID. And it was a real phenomenon. And one of the reasons I updated my book was because there was so much amazing research that went on as a result of COVID that is fascinating. And McKinsey and Company did a really large-scale global study. And they said, why were all these people either leaving, resigning and moving, or stating that they would if they could financially afford it, they would. And they found 3 key reasons that people either resigned or wanted to resign. The first, and in fact, in the paper, it actually said anything for autonomy. So they wanted autonomy and flexibility. And COVID had brought to people's awareness that having the flexibility was just a lot of what had been missing in their life. And that the choices they had around when to work, how to work, The second thing was to leave a toxic culture and to find more meaningful and purposeful work. The third was greater opportunities for growth and learning. I was breathless as I read that report, and I went, oh my gosh, choice, connection, and competence, right there in that McKinsey report. And so what I would encourage leaders to do is just say, in every interaction that you have, am I either building or encouraging choice, or am I eroding it? In this interaction that I just had, am I promoting and am I deepening connection, or am I undermining it? And in this interaction, did I help a person build competence, or did I thwart their own sense of efficacy or their own sense that they can do something or that they're learning and growing? I just feel like leaders, every interaction they have with people, have an opportunity to create a more optimally motivating environment.
I love it. I love it, Susan. And as we come to a close, this being the Game Changing Attorney podcast, what does being a game changer mean to you?
I've really thought about this question. I'm personally going through a time of great transformation. And what I realized is that that's the name of the game. The name of the game, and remember earlier I said evolve is like my favorite word. And so we're constantly evolving. The question is, are we evolving consciously? Is it a conscious transformation? Is it transformation towards something better and good and that brings peace and joy to people? And so I guess like being a game changer means that you master that in your own life first, that you ask yourself every day, what am I bringing to the world? What is my energy? And then a game changer is in that moment. And I have to tell you that I don't think there's anything better in life is when you're interacting with an individual and you realize that you contributed to their well-being. You've contributed to their thriving. You haven't diminished it in any way. That's being a game changer.
I hope you enjoyed revisiting this episode of the Game Changing Attorney podcast with our guest, Susan Fowler, and have gained new insights from our timeless conversation. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on our interview with Susan Fowler, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.